This podcast is brought to you by the North Dakota Petroleum Foundation. From heating our homes and powering our vehicles to cell phones, clothing, and medical equipment, oil and natural gas makes everyday life better. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities. Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org. Welcome to Plain Talk Live. I'm your host, Rob Port. If you could name a city in North Dakota that wasn't maybe founded around a rail stop or has rails running through it, or even just had rails running through it at one time in its history, I will buy you lunch. That's how important rail infrastructure is to the state of North Dakota. And the reason why is pretty obvious. We produce stuff here. We produce crops. We have manufacturing that produces products. We produce energy products like oil that gets shipped by rail. Rail infrastructure it would be difficult to overestimate how important it is to our state. So when one of the major providers of rail capacity to the state of North Dakota is talking about a major merger with another company, it's of interest to North Dakota. Canadian Pacific Railroad wants to merge with Kansas City Southern. Kansas City Southern. Boy, I'm stumbling all over myself. They made their bid earlier this year, March 21st. Another company, Canadian National, has offered Kansas City more money, in fact, about $5 billion more. But there are some regulatory hurdles, and the whole thing needs to be settled by what's called the Surface Transportation Board, which is a federal agency that oversees rail mergers in the United States of America. Here to talk with me about this is John Brooks. He is the Chief Marketing Officer of Canadian Pacific Railroad. John, first off, thanks for your time. And second, why does CP Rail want this merger?
Yeah, so Rob, thanks for having me. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to speak with your listeners. You know what? We from day one have had our eye on the Kansas City Southern. It's just a natural end-to-end fit for our railroad. If you know our rail map, we kind of end at Kansas City, Missouri, and on the northern end, they end at Kansas City, Missouri, also. So we link at one point, and it naturally creates and opens up new extended reach for both of our companies, and most importantly, all of our shippers.
So when I look at the map, it looks like Canadian Pacific is a lot of you go east-west, whereas Kansas City Southern goes north-south. That seems like a very logical fit. If you're wanting to expand into new territories, you want to go north and south. You're already going east and west. I mean, is that part of it?
Absolutely, Rob. You know, the STB, who you mentioned earlier, has been, and really their mandate is to ensure and protect the strength and viability of the nation's rail network. You know, they have recognized, I think pretty openly since day one, around the rules they're going to apply to our proposed merger, around our use of a voting trust, that because our network and the characteristics you just described, that we're largely across Canada and into the northern plains of the U.S. and the KCS is the southern part of the U.S. and of course into Mexico, that our end-to-end nature of our merger not only creates new lanes and opportunities to enhance competition across North America, specifically in the north-south corridor, linking places like North Dakota down to, the chicken feeders down in Arkansas, or the export terminals in the Gulf, or down into Mexico. And so it not only enhances competition, but the great thing about it is because there's zero overlap, there's no anti-competitive concerns with our merger. As compared to, as you described, our competitor CN sort of coming over the top and using their balance sheet to try to push us out of the way, that proposed merger is just fraught with anti-competitive overlap.
Explain that a little bit for us, because I think most of us are out here are, we don't work in the rail industry, so we don't spend a lot of time thinking about this. Another company comes along and they offer significantly more money. Why shouldn't that happen? I mean, when you're talking about anti-competitive overlap, what does that mean as a practical
Yeah,
matter?
yeah, no. So it means a number of different things, and I'll start with maybe the obvious known fact is between like Baton Rouge in New Orleans in Louisiana, the two rail lines, KCS and Canadian National (CN), completely run parallel to each other and compete head to head with a number of industries and customers down in that area. Of course, if now CN owns them, that competition disappears. But it's not just that region. They touch in places like Jackson, Mississippi, and Omaha, Nebraska, and Springfield, Illinois, and St. Louis, Missouri. CN today, Rob, has, if you look at their map, they run east and west, similar to we do as CP, but they already have a north-south line. They already run from Chicago down to New Orleans. And, our network today, as I said, stops at Kansas City. Combining us with the KCS creates a network that very much mirrors the Canadian National and gives us the ability to add that competition in that north-south lane. They already run there today. It's an overlapping parallel line for the CN if they acquire the KCS. And I think just one more point that's important to think about. It's not only competition in terms of these overlapping locations and customers and facilities that'll lose a competitive option. As I think about North Dakota and our shippers out there, a grain customer or shipper in Enderlin, North Dakota, that today is limited on market access because our CP rail lines today can only go so far west or so far east or so far south. Tomorrow, with our combination with the KCS, we would be able to enable a single line direct haul, down into the Gulf or into Mexico, that if CN is successful, will never be available to that shipper into the future.
Well, that's one thing I wanted to ask about is what are some of the specific benefits. But just to get back to the competitive issue, essentially CN already has some north-south infrastructure running down into those southern markets. Your argument is, well, let CP Rail into that same market, and now there's well, I mean, obviously depending on maybe where you're originating, but now there's essentially some competition there for that southern market. Is that it in a nutshell?
You nailed it, Rob. Absolutely. The Canadian National and the Illinois Central a number of years back merged to create that north-south line, and it is a main artery for CN today. They run Chicago down to Memphis, down to New Orleans, so they provide that service today. So themselves, the Union Pacific has a route down through there also, Rob, and so does the Burlington Northern Santa Fe. But what doesn't exist today is a CP KCS route. And you combine our network and you interject that additional enhanced competition in that lane. And you're right on. If CN gets it, it's redundant. That's their words, not ours. You don't gain that competitive alternative.
It becomes essentially more of the same. So let's talk about what does this mean? I mean, if I'm making grains in North Dakota, or I'm manufacturing a widget or something that I wanna move, and obviously, one of the challenges North Dakota's, I mean, one of the reasons why we have so much rail in North Dakota in the first place, again, we produce a lot of stuff. This infrastructure is hugely important to us. Rail infrastructure, pipeline infrastructure, transmission line infrastructure. North Dakota is a place where a lot of things get produced, but those things don't do us any good if we can't get them to market. So if I'm a farmer and I'm making grains, what does this mean for me?
Yeah, so I think in just the purest sense, Rob, it means more optionality, more market competitiveness than you have today. the state of North Dakota is served by two primary Class 1 railroads, the Burlington Northern Santa Fe, and they are the dominant rail carrier across North Dakota, and Canadian Pacific. The BN today reaches a lot of different markets. We're limited just by our size and scope of how big we are, Rob. And if you think about, as we grow our network and extend our reach with the KCS, in its purest form, it just allows us to offer those ag shippers more optionality and destinations to take their grain. And that should be good for competition. That when that farmer's making a decision on what grain elevator to haul his grain to in any given day, if both of those elevators are on a more even playing field in terms of markets they can deliver the grain to and where they can sell it, that should be better for everyone. And really, in its purest form, that's what we believe our combination brings to the shippers of North Dakota.
How about for energy? Now, I know that grains, I think for your specific business are a bigger portion of it, but energy is not unimportant. And obviously, we look at some of the situations, the political situations around pipelines, which we've covered extensively in other shows. That sort of capacity to move that product is, let's say it's a little bit of a chaotic situation right now. So, to my mind, any additional infrastructure or flexibility we can have in being able to bring products to market is good. So for energy producers, to speak about this in that context.
Yeah, absolutely. Over the past 3 to 5 years, Rob, we at CP have spent a lot of money to upgrade our rail lines through North Dakota. We've put in centralized train control systems that allow us to create more capacity and move our trains more efficiently through your state or originating in your state. But we also did it as we hauled more oil in energy products. It's also a safer rail network than it's ever been. So I see a tremendous opportunity that with the ability to have single route options, into, again, the Texas and the Gulf area. Currently Burlington Northern and CP, to some extent, we haul oil out of there to different markets, but much like grain, we're limited on where we can go. And we would see an opportunity to haul more energy products, from North Dakota, potentially down into that Gulf market, or maybe even into Mexico.
Yeah. And those markets, as we know, can be very fluid. I mean, the place where it makes sense to ship oil one year might change from year to year. So that's flexibility. I think the point is a good thing. The rail markets are very interesting in that, rail is not something you can just go out and build. I mean, like it's one thing to build a retail store next to Walmart or down the street from Walmart or something and compete with them. Doesn't really work that way with rail, which is why we have something like the Surface Transportation Board to make sure that we're protecting competitiveness, and that becomes really important. And what was interesting to me, because I think most of us, we think about that we're stopped at a train crossing, right? And I'm just, CP Rail,
right.
BNSF, right? I don't know. It was really interesting. Some of the information you sent over said the combined railroad, if this merger went through, would remain one of the smallest 6 Class 1 railroads by revenue, which I think is interesting, because I think there may be some people listening to this thinking, big corporations getting bigger. It's really not the case. I mean, it seems like this is really pro-competitive, to the extent that we can say that when we have a government board basically kind of calling the shots. And again, I address that it's a unique situation, but I thought that was really interesting, that this isn't really like Walmart acquiring a competitor. This is really about keeping things on an even keel.
Yeah, and that is a great point, and one at which we, as we think about, and I'm, asking your listeners that if you care about this, to please reach out to the STB, because that point in itself is very important, Rob. The reason the STB has been, positive around our combination is exactly to that point. You're taking the two smallest Class 1 railroads, and you're combining them to create and enhance more competition, but they're still the smallest railroad. You combine the CN with the KCS, and you get the third largest railroad. The big do get bigger, and you know how it is when we're competing head to head against a big competitor like we do against CN. You know, they've got so many touch points that they can create leverage with customers that sometimes it's just flat out hard to compete. And again, I think that's at the essence of why I'm on your show today, and really to the appeal to your listeners across North Dakota that, you know, the STB has said that they're open for public comment on this issue until June 28th. So it's critically important. The CN has asked for a voting approval on a voting trust to acquire the KCS as soon as possible before the merger is fully studied. And we're saying that's bad business. This merger needs to be fully studied first.
You mentioned the voting trust issue. For those of us who aren't in, what is that? I'm not sure I entirely understand what that is.
Yeah, it's a mechanism that's been used historically in the railroad business during mergers or acquisitions that allows the acquiring companies to essentially acquire the railroad so the shareholder of the KCS gets their money right up front. But the acquiring company doesn't get immediate control of the operations until the STB reviews all the finer points. Well, in the past, you know, it was a pretty strong indication. You got a voting trust, well, then we're probably going to also give you approval on a merger. Because otherwise, if you acquire something and then you can't actually run it, you got to break it up or sell it, or you got to do something with it because you didn't get that ultimate approval. CN has asked for the ability to do that, to acquire KCS before the STB even has a chance to go through their new rules and study it. Now, if it was end to end like ours with limited competitive impact, that's one thing. But as I said, there's a number of competitive elements at play with the CN KCS, and that's why we're saying, look, that shouldn't be allowed. If it's so good, allow them to go through the full merger review first before you allow them to buy it.
What scenario? I guess that seems a little odd that they would acquire a company and then essentially put it in a box for a while until the government decides whether or not the acquisition can go. What possible benefit? And I realize I'm asking the person who's opposed to doing this to explain it to me, but you know what I'm not understanding what the benefit of that is. Like why. I don't understand. I can't even understand the rebuttal argument why you would want to do that.
Yeah, it's a mechanism. You're right, Rob. It's a mechanism that's been used in the past that essentially allows the acquired company shareholder to get their money up front. It de-risks the transaction for them, the KCS shareholder. And so they want that. So they've made that a condition of their sale. And again, it's frankly why we've said, you know, it shouldn't be allowed. If it's so good, let it go through the full process. And counter to that also, Rob, is it allows us sort of back in the game. It allows us to say, well, you know, ours is different. It doesn't have competitive overlap. So support, you know, KCS shareholder, come back to CP.
So why? I mean, the shareholder rebuttal to that might be, well, CN's offering us $5 billion more. I mean, at the end of the day, if I'm a shareholder, which I'm not, you know, but if I'm a shareholder in KCS, I'm thinking, you know, that makes what I own more valuable. Why shouldn't I support that?
Yeah, I agree. Like, and I frankly believe that's why the KCS shareholder had the fiduciary responsibility to take the CN bid. But Rob, if you can't get it all done, it's fool's gold. And And in our point to the KCS shareholder is we understand you have the fiduciary responsibility to try to capture and maximize that value. But at the end of the day, it's only as good as your ability to realize it.
I would
And
have to think too that if you're a KCS shareholder, this CN approach to where they want to essentially acquire the company, put it in the box on the assumption that this will go through, that seems like a big roll of the dice to me. It's like you're allowing them to acquire your asset, put it in a box, but maybe the government doesn't approve it. Now what's your asset worth? I mean, still something obviously, but that seems risky to me.
That's our point exactly. We believe it's risky too, and it's more the reason why I think people need to speak up now, because what you describes happens and they get the voting trust, and then the merger doesn't get improved. It does a couple things, Rob. It creates a path to other mergers. It allows other class one railroads to say, well, they got a voting trust, they got to do this, why can't I? And maybe it is a springboard for other potential mergers, which again might not be in the best public interest of our national rail network. But it also risks the whole notion of, if they get to the end and it doesn't get approved, what do they do with it? Do they bust it up? Do they sell it for parts? Do they sell it to private equity? They're probably not going to sell it to CP because we're their number one competitor. So what will they do with it at that point?
Last final thoughts here. If you're a North Dakotan, and again, I mean, so much of our industry, so much of our business depends on rail here. People here who want to weigh in on this, I know you said contact the STB. How does one go about doing that? I think most of us don't have the STB in our contacts list. So, how do you do that? Does contacting our federal delegation help? I mean, how does that? How would somebody who wants to weigh in on this? How would they go about doing that? What's the best way?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Rob. So certainly, we have been in contact with your Senator Hoeven, Senator Kramer. They have been more than willing in on board to listen to us and think through the implications of North Dakota. You can visit our microsite online. It's futureforfreight.com, all run together, futureforfreight.com. And there's the ability to connect directly through that site to us or the STB to raise your concerns. More than happy to reach out to Canadian Pacific. You can reach out to our team, and we can help make those connections. But the time is now. It's overdue to get off the fence, and it's time to speak out if you're in favor of pro competition and pro new markets. Then CPKCS is the answer.
John, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate it. Take care.